Janice Albany moved through the halls of Larchmont Hills Academy like a ghost, unseen, unheard, and utterly dismissed. To the privileged students who strode past her with their designer backpacks and air of invincibility, she was nothing more than part of the scenery, a nameless figure in a drab uniform pushing a mop bucket or hauling a trash bag. Camille Strathmore, with her razor-sharp smirk, would toss her empty iced coffee cup directly into Janice's path, not even bothering to glance her way. Olivia Cranston, ever the ringleader, would laugh with her friends about how pathetic it must be to clean up after others, her voice deliberately loud enough to carry. But Janice wasn't just a janitor. Beneath the frayed cuffs of her work shirt, she carried a small, high-definition recorder. Inside the pocket of her faded slacks, a notebook filled with meticulous observations. Dates, times, names. Every sneer. Every act of casual cruelty. Every time a teacher pretended not to hear a slur whispered in the halls. It was all documented. The school board had suspected for years that Larchmont Hills had a problem, one buried beneath glossy brochures and generous alumni donations. They needed proof, and Janice was their best-kept secret. When the board first approached her, Janice had been skeptical. She had taken a custodial job out of necessity, a way to pay the bills while she finished her master's degree in social justice through the Academy Staff Scholarship Program. She had never expected to become an undercover operative in her own workplace. But the more she learned about the unchecked bullying, the way wealthy parents influenced disciplinary actions, the way scholarship students were systematically ostracized, the more she realized how deep the rot went. So she agreed. At first, it was just small things. She'd linger near the lockers when Camille and Olivia held court, pretending to scrub at an invisible stain while their words dripped with venom. She'd empty the trash in the faculty lounge, listening as teachers exchanged knowing glances when certain students were mentioned. "Oh, don't bother writing up Strathmore's daughter," one would murmur. Her mother just donated a new science wing. Then came the bigger incidents. One afternoon, Janice was restocking paper towels when she heard muffled sobs from the last stall. Peering through the crack in the door, she saw Mira Patel, a quiet sophomore on a merit scholarship, hunched over with her knees to her chest. Her notebook lay splayed on the floor, pages torn, the words "freeloader trash" scrawled across the cover in red marker. Janice hesitated. Her role was to observe, not intervene. But then Mira looked up, her dark eyes glistening with humiliation, and something in Janice snapped. "Hey," she said softly, pushing the door open. "You okay?" Mira stiffened, wiping her face hastily. I'm fine." Janice bent down, picking up the ruined notebook. Olivia's work? Myra's silence was answer enough. Janice didn't say anything else. But that night, she filed an extra report, one with names, verbatim quotes, and a recommendation for immediate disciplinary action. As the weeks passed, Janice uncovered something even more insidious. The staff scholarship program, the very one funding her own education, was being manipulated. Wealthy families were pressuring the administration to prioritize their children for financial aid slots, despite their obvious lack of need. Meanwhile, actual low-income applicants were being quietly rejected. Janice dug deeper, cross-referencing financial records with student files. The evidence was undeniable. By the time the school board had enough to act, Janice had compiled over 300 pages of documentation. The day the investigation went public, Larchmont Hills erupted in chaos. Parents threatened lawsuits. Students who had once ruled the halls with impunity suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Olivia Cranston's father, a prominent attorney, tried to have the entire report dismissed as the delusional ramblings of a disgruntled employee. But it was too late. Camille and Olivia were suspended pending a full review. Several faculty members were placed on administrative leave. The scholarship program was overhauled, with an independent committee installed to ensure fairness. And Janice? She walked the halls one last time, no longer invisible. Students who had once ignored her now whispered as she passed. Some glared. Others, like Mira, smiled. That evening, Janice submitted her final thesis, Asterisk Systems of Power and the Illusion of Meritocracy in Elite Institutions. Asterisk. Then she turned in her keys and walked out, leaving Larchmont Hills and its ghosts behind. At graduation, the privileged students were stunned when Janice, the quiet and overlooked janitor who had spent years silently observing their every move, was announced as valedictorian. As she stepped onto the stage, the crowd buzzed with confusion. How could someone they had ignored, mocked, or treated as invisible now hold the highest honor? Her powerful speech began softly, but quickly cut through the room like a knife. "I wasn't just cleaning your messes, I was documenting them," she declared, her voice steady as she pulled out a thick folder filled with photos, videos, and written records of every act of cruelty, entitlement, and rule-breaking the elite students had committed. The screen behind her lit up with evidence, Camille and Olivia laughing as they shoved food into a freshman's backpack, wealthy athletes bribing teachers for grades, seniors vandalizing school property, while administrators turned a blind eye. Janice revealed how she had spent years gathering proof, waiting for the right moment to expose the corruption festering at their prestigious school. The audience gasped as she announced sweeping reforms, expelled students, revoked scholarships, canceled internships for those who had abused their power. Camille's prestigious law internship, gone. The firm had already been notified of her bullying. Olivia's academic honors, stripped after evidence of cheating surfaced. The star quarterback's full-ride scholarship, withdrawn when videos of his vandalism went viral. Parents in the crowd erupted in outrage, but the school board stood firm. Janice's evidence was undeniable. By the time she finished, the one smug graduate sat in stunned silence, their futures crumbling as their actions finally had consequences. The faculty, too, faced scrutiny. Several teachers resigned after Janice exposed their favoritism. As she stepped down, the standing ovation came not from the wealthy elite, but from the cafeteria workers, custodians, and scholarship students who had endured years of mistreatment. The school would never be the same, and neither would the students who had learned too late that privilege doesn't make you untouchable. Camille and Olivia, once queens of the school, now faced public humiliation, their reputations in ruins, while Janice, the girl they'd never noticed, walked away with a full scholarship to the university of her choice, her bravery celebrated far beyond the walls of their broken institution. Janice's story became legend at Larchmont Hills, a tale whispered in classrooms and echoed in the quiet moments between lessons, a reminder that greatness often walks unseen among us. Hired as a new director of equity and inclusion, she returned to the very halls she had once cleaned, her footsteps now echoing with authority where they had once been muffled by the weight of invisibility. The students who had passed her with barely a glance now straightened their postures when she spoke, their eyes widening as they recognized a woman who had mopped their spills and polished their trophies, now standing at the podium addressing the entire school. The faculty, too, felt the weight of their past indifference. How many times had they hurried past her without a word, never imagining the depth of her intelligence, the resilience of her spirit, or the quiet determination that had carried her from janitorial shifts to night classes, from borrowed textbooks to a master's degree? The school learned a hard lesson that day, one etched into its walls like the grooves of a well-worn desk. True character isn't measured by wealth or status, by the designer labels on your backpack or the size of your family's house, but by how you treat those you think don't matter, those whose names you don't bother to learn, whose stories you never pause to hear. And sometimes the quietest person in the room, the one who speaks least, who observes most, who absorbs every slight and every kindness with equal grace, is the one who changes everything, not with shout, but with the quiet force of their example. Janice's rise wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a mirror held up to Larchmont Hills, revealing the cracks in its assumptions, the blind spots in its privilege. Students who had once tossed their trash on the floor now bent to pick it up, not because they feared punishment, but because they remembered the woman who had knelt to clean it. Teachers who had once dismissed the quietest voices in class now leaned in, wondering what other potential they'd overlooked. The school's culture shifted, not overnight, but like the turning of a tide, as small acts of respect became currency and empathy became habit. Janice's office door stayed open, not just as a policy, but as a promise, a reminder that every person who walked those halls, whether pushing a mop or carrying a diploma, deserved to be seen. And in the years that followed, her story became more than legend. It became a living lesson, a seed planted in the hearts of those who would carry it forward, knowing that the world is shaped not just by the loudest voices, but by the quietest hands, the ones at work that persevere, that refuse to be defined by the limits others set. Larchmont Hills would never be the same, because Janice had shown them that the true measure of community isn't in its trophies or test scores, but in its ability to recognize the light in every person, no matter how dimly it seems to burn. And so, her legacy lived on, not in plaques or ceremonies, but in the way the custodian was greeted by name, in the way the shyest student was encouraged to speak, in the way the school learned to see itself not as a hierarchy, but as a tapestry, woven together by threads they had once overlooked but would now cherish. Subscribe to our channel Black Resistance, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.